Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. Today, I am honored to have Aaron Anders with me. Aaron is the founder of Tungsten, and
You nailed it. That's exactly how you said it. It's exactly how you say it there. Perfect.
Chris taught me that I had to practice it. No, so he's an entrepreneur, and the fun thing about his story, and you're going to get to hear that today, is that the idea of entrepreneurship has always been alive in Aaron. So I can't wait to highlight it. But Aaron, thanks so much for being on today.
Hey, I'm pumped to be able to spend some time together, and you guys were just talking before we jumped in. I think in the moment, like in that moment, that's a really cool thing. And I think storytelling is a big piece of it, and I'm pumped to and lucky to have been able to have a few of those moments along the way that it'll be fun to revisit with you.
You betcha. So just to kick it off, Aaron, so growing up, you're 8 years old and you notice that there are people in the neighborhood that are wanting to buy pop, and you say, well, maybe I can make a couple bucks selling pop. So let's start there and let's learn about that first kind of entrepreneurial moment.
Oh, I mean, that's such a cool thing to think back on, right? Like, and again, I don't, when you're a kid, you're just doing what you think is fun, right? Like, you don't know any different. And, for me, playing baseball was fun, and playing golf was fun, and selling stuff was fun. It just was part of, that's the way it was. And I was, again, you nailed it. It was about 8 years old. We moved into a new build subdivision. There was more subdivision being built, like the next block over. We were like that last block of like completed houses when we moved in. It was fun because when it rained, we didn't have grass yet, so I had to play in the mud, like that kind of like mental view of it. And then it was the summer, and I remember thinking and seeing like this truck go by all the time. What is that? And they sell snacks to the construction workers. And I was like, what snacks? And, pop was one of them. They drink a bunch of soda. So I was like, okay, well, how much is it? So I actually went and chased the truck down and saw how much is like what stuff. And it was $1 for, I'm like, $1. Well, how much do they cost? And it was like, we can get a whole case of 24 of them for $5 or whatever it was. And I was like, whoa, like, it blew my mind, right? Like that first thought of like, there's margin there without knowing you're thinking there's margin there. So for me, I could go sell it for 50 cents and, throw a case of pop in a cooler on a wagon and drag it around and just go into construction sites and ask if anyone's thirsty and sell it for 50 cents and, go back. And my mom didn't realize the monster that had been created, because she'd have to go to the grocery store and get like another round of pop. And I'd go, have to get a bigger cooler so I could like walk further, because I'd be out of pop. But it was like that first idea of like, had no idea what you're doing, but like how do I scale this? Or I'm a one person thing, and does this whole thing work, right? And I can't even imagine, I mean, kids now, I can't imagine like sending my 8-year-old to go do a 3-mile walk with a cooler to go into random construction sites. It just sounds strange, but as I said, it was fun to me. It was like collecting. That's how I thought of it. Like it wasn't about getting rich per se, right? It was about collecting and like understanding that, wow, I can take like $5 and I can turn it into like 20.
Yeah.
Okay, like this is kind of a fun thing. So that was a really really interesting piece for me, and really it was the first time I sold something, and it was as I said, no different in my head as playing baseball or golf or anything else growing up.
I love it. Yes. And that's an entrepreneurial mind, right? I mean, that's a gift to be able to see things that way, because not everyone does. Now, additionally, growing up, you started doing some fishing with your dad, and that became something that was a hobby and something you enjoyed. So what about fishing, really made you enjoy that?
I love being outside too. Like the idea, I mean, for me, I can't work in an office, right? Like being in an office it's tough, right? For me. Like I want to be outside. I like being outdoors. I like being active, like all that stuff. And, for me, it was spending time with my dad. And I realized much later, but it was also getting little kids out of the house so that like there's a bit of downtime at home. But it was just something that we did as a ritual, right? Like, you do it as a bit of a ritual. And I'm a pretty competitive person, as I mentioned, baseball and golf, and even, selling things is kind of competitive. And, for me, that started tournament fishing. And once I was able to be outside and have a competitive outlet and learn a bunch, and it's also, again, fun for me too. And I think like all of that stuff combined into this like perfect storm. And, I started doing a lot more fishing and trying to get better at it. And then understanding that you can get better at it and how much better, and then compete, especially when you're 14 and you're competing against 40-year-olds. It was fun to win, right? It's fun to be the
Yeah.
kid and then be like, what's going on? And so again, I think like that just really, it started off as just something that we did, and then it had a few more elements that got layers onto it, which really fueled my love of being outside, and then competitiveness, and put that all together. And it was a lot of tournament fishing growing up too.
Yeah. So let's talk how you got into that. So I think sometimes people's story of fishing is it was like the first time they got a bite, they were like, oh man, that really just had me hooked. Like I wanted to keep doing it. Other people are like, well, first time I went out, it was kind of boring, like I didn't catch anything, or I didn't catch anything, of size. And eventually it just, it became something I like to do with my dad. So then it became a hobby or a passion of mine, and it grew. How did that kind of formulate for you?
That's a really cool question. Because I've never thought of it. But as you're asking the question, like what's going through my head is, it wasn't like we would just go on the boat and sit and float around.
Yeah.
We fished from the bank all the time. So, I remember like catching frogs and like fishing for a bit, and then like picking up a stick and like throwing it in and watching it like go down. Like it wasn't all just fishing. It was
Yeah.
being outside. It was like, it's like going for a hike. Some people says, I don't like go for a hike, but like when you go for a hike, like there's other things that you do along the way when you go for a hike. And yes, there is the idea of like getting the views and doing different things, but for me, I was always just looking forward to being outside. And then yes, fishing was cool, like catching like hooking a fish and not knowing what it is, and being, what's this gonna
Yeah.
be, and how big is it gonna be, and oh man, I think this is a bigger one. Or like going down a river bank and just walking and catching a frog or a little snake, or feeding a little snake one of our worms, or just all those like things were so interesting to me. But then starting to go, well, I think there might be a fish over there,
Yeah.
stopping and fishing and then catching one, and then that becoming a part of it. So I think that's what it was for me growing up there. And it's still a bunch of that. I think, Chris and I actually, partner in Tungsten. He was up this way. We went fishing on Sunday. It was the first time we fished together in honestly a couple of years. And
I love it.
we saw a fish laying on the bottom, taking a break, and then got up and just took off. And both of us were like, I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
What the heck was that? So to be able to still constantly have like these other things that present themselves that are a bit different and unique and all that kind of stuff, I think is a big piece of it for me too.
Yes, that's neat. Now, yeah, once again, we've said Chris a couple of times. Chris Van Vliet, he was on the show, and so now we have Aaron, his business partner, on here. So you guys actually get to meet through fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. We again, growing up in competitive tournaments and a bunch of different things, and I ended up doing a bit of like a TV series when I was young, and it was fishing tips for kids.
Yeah.
So a lot of like the national shows would have like their show, and then they'd have like this 30-second spot of like a kid's fishing tip. So we did that. And again, I think like the entrepreneurial side of things, it's like, well, we would watch fishing shows on Sunday morning, but there's no kids here. Like, I don't even understand, like I don't understand half the things people are talking about. Right. So it's like, can we put this in a kid's place? So I did that for a few years. And then one of those national shows that we were a part of also had a national fishing contest through the year, and an adult division and then a youth division. And Chris won the youth division one year. And so they have their like spring fishing show, the expos that you have, and they have a booth. And so they bring the winners of their contest. And I happened to be in the booth for that national show, and Chris and I actually met. So when you're I guess we're about 14, 15, and you got to stand in a trade show booth for 4 days, like it's boring enough as an adult when you're running your business. So we had a bunch of time to talk and goof off and have some fun together. And then we saw each other there again the next year, and actually lost contact. It's different, right? Different time. I mean, that was 20 years ago, right? So and then when I went to college, went to university, and I'm like, I know that guy. Where do I know that guy from? I saw him from across the field. I'm like, gosh, where do I? And then it hit me. I'm like, oh my God, that's Chris.
Yeah.
We actually reconnected in university, and we went to a university party, and there's all these people hanging out until the wee hours of the morning, and we're like literally dead center in the middle talking about fishing. And and we're like, oh, like it was just kind of one of those like reconnects where it was all of a sudden completely different again. So yeah, we met early on through fishing, and reconnected through yeah, through school, and stayed connected ever since.
How crazy. Yeah, I love that story. I mean, you knew each other, and then, yeah, like you said, due to the times, it's a little bit harder to stay in contact, things like that. But then inevitably comes full circle in college, kind of rekindle the friendship. And
No
then
doubt.
obviously it blossoms from there.
No doubt. Yeah, we started fishing tournaments together, and again, we decided at that college party that we are going to fish tournaments next summer, and then it's one of those funny things. The first time we ever spent in the boat together was in a tournament, so it's not like you get to know that person, but now we're committed to a full series and a full season, and spent countless 12-hour days in the boat together, and yeah, it just really kind of was never. Yeah, there's no friction. It was just very simple and smooth. And sometimes, you say in the moment, did you know? Like, absolutely not, right? Like,
Yeah.
sometimes those things are just meant to be, right? Like, it's crazy to think back 15 years old, if someone had walked by us and said, "Hey, you guys are going to run a business together in 2 decades from now," we'd be like, who is this person? What are you talking about? We're just trying to like make it through this 4-day week of trade show booths. But yeah, no, very, very cool.
Absolutely. So in your college experience, then you end up getting connected with a company called College Pro. And talk a little bit about, what was attractive about the opportunity for you originally, and how you got started there.
Yeah, I mean, everyone looks for a summer job in college,
Yeah.
and for me, business was an interest, and I had some friends with different sports that I played along the way that that were starting to graduate college, and they were I saw two of them. They were talking. They were like interviewing for the same position, but neither of them wanted it. And I was like, "Why are you guys interviewing?" Like, I'm naive. I'm like, "Why are
Yeah.
you doing that?" Well, there's not like a ton of jobs out there. And so
Right.
I'm like, my two friends are fighting over a job neither of them want. Like, I never want to be in that position. Like, why
Yeah.
would I go through all of college to be there? And so I'm like, well, I guess I better do something different, right? Like, if I'm gonna have to fight people for jobs, I should do something different. And then I heard about this again, a summer position where I could actually run my own business, and it sounded kind of cool. And as the more I learned about it, I realized I didn't have to go start my own business. It was taking over an existing business and a home servicing business. And I'm like, well, that sounds really tough, but I think I can do it. And if I can do it and others might not be able to, I might stand out again. So I thought it'd be this cool summer job. I'll learn a whole bunch. I'm a business student. I should run a business. Like, I think I can make some decent money with it. So I did it. And my first year, I got my butt kicked, like anybody who runs a business, let's say,
Yep.
for the first time. But the biggest benefit that I had with College Pro is that I had there's 150 other people running the exact same business in their own region all across the country. It's a franchise system, right? So I
Yep.
can look at other people that are having success and learn from them. And that was like
Right.
really interesting to me because, again, competitive.
Yeah.
I wanted to beat them, but I also felt like I could do better. So there's like that self-competitiveness. I'm like, wow, that
Mhm.
person ran something twice the size I did. Yes, they've been around for a few years, but clearly there's a gap from where I am
Yeah.
and where I want to be. So I ran it for another year because I felt like I could do it again and do it better. I doubled the size of the operation I was able to run from year 1 to 2. And I thought, well, okay, like what if I did it for a third? Would I double it again? And I did. But at that point, it kind of was ingrained in me. I got to run a home servicing business, a lot of like residential window cleaning, be outside all summer. My friends are fighting traffic to get into office buildings. I'm fighting a farmer's tan. Like, I'm
Yeah.
working probably more hours and way harder than they are, but like I had complete control over what I was doing, and it just kind of became a part of me. Like, it really fit some of those other things that were good fits for me along the way, and the competitiveness and the self-competitiveness. It became almost like a sport outlet. At some point you stop playing sports at a higher level, but to me,
Yes.
like, business kind of became my sport that I could keep getting better at and improving at. And for me, I was surrounded at that point by 100 other people that were trying to do the same thing, that were all maybe
Right.
different, but like there was this community of trying to get better, and it was somewhere where I could go progress. So I did it actually every summer of college. I had no idea that was going to be the path for me. I thought I was looking for a good summer job. I graduated. I then took on a full-time corporate position as a coach,
Yeah.
coaching a bunch of other students that were starting to run it, and that was my full-time position. And then from there, took over the province of Ontario to be able to manage their operations, and then after a few years of that. So 2016, I took over the operations for the rest of Canada. So,
Yeah.
I remember being in my interview, I thought I would take a good summer job that might help separate me so that when I went to get my quote career job, I wouldn't be fighting other people for things that I
Yeah.
didn't want. Meanwhile, like that was a decade and a half ago. So I think for me, like that was a really cool progress because without knowing it fit a lot of things with me, and I learned a ton. Like just fast tracked. It was like in sports going up a level.
Hmm.
If anyone's ever like played high level sports, and then you like make the team that's one notch higher than you
Yes.
were, and you used to be one of the better players, and then now you move up and it's the same game, but you're getting your butt kicked. You
Yeah.
progress. It hurts,
Yep.
but you get better way faster by playing with better people and being in more challenging situations. And that's what it was and is still for me right now. So
I I'm so happy you brought that up. So one thing that's been super impactful for me is when I really started reflecting on what did sports teach me, right? Because if you only ever thought of your uh sport as, a fun sport and never really reflect on like life lessons you can take away from it, you missed a big portion of what sports were teaching you. But for me, one of the things that was so relevant was in basketball. So that was my sport. I played basketball, and it's if I missed a shot, yeah, it sucked to miss the shot, right? I wasn't happy I did it. I felt bad I let my team down. At the same token, the next time I got the ball, I wasn't going to lose any confidence to shoot the next shot because I still believed I was a good shooter and I could make the next one. And I think similarly in business, it's like, well, I want every deal to close, or I want it to always go my way. The reality is it's just never going to happen. But some people lose confidence to do the next ask because it didn't go the right way. But when I correlate it to basketball, I was like, well, I would never stop shooting just because I missed one shot. Like, why would I stop in business asking for that? So maybe talk about one or two lessons that you've pulled away from, some of your competitive and sports things that have helped in your business career.
yeah, when you're describing, I actually got goosebumps all up because I use that example of basketball, with frequency when I try to describe it. Like
Yeah.
business is the most losing sport in the world.
Right.
Like it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And I think sports teaches you to lose,
Yep.
right? You can go on a losing streak. Doesn't mean you're never going to win again. Doesn't mean you quit. Like
Right.
that's not reality. Like I also think like you could have a losing season. You finish the season. Like that doesn't happen, right? Like
Yeah.
let's take the worst team in the NBA, say basketball.
Yeah.
They don't stop at game 50 because it's over, right?
Right.
You start working on like what's actually happening there is they're thinking about next season.
Yep.
They're going like, okay, great. Like, they're starting to go, okay, what are our gaps? And they're not trying to make the playoffs anymore. Like that's
Yeah.
done. So like what's next? And they start building for the next year. And probably honestly, if you're the worst team in the NBA, you got a 3 to 5 year window where you got to rebuild.
Yep.
But you're still a team in the NBA, like at that point. And I think that's a big learning point for me too, is that like you lose one game doesn't mean you're dead. It doesn't mean that the team that won the championship the year before doesn't actually miss the playoffs the next year. There's like
Correct.
ebbs and flows on both sides of it.
Yeah.
I think baseball for me, playing a lot of baseball growing up, like the best hitter in the league is probably, again, hitting somewhere around 300,
Yeah.
which means that, they're not hit, that's a 30% success rate and they're like all time.
Right.
So for a career. So thinking about that as like, that in that situation, but you have to be willing to have a negative result 2.5 times as often as a positive result is really, really important. Right. And I think thinking about that, and you mentioned a team game, like another piece of that is when someone misses the shot, like you don't blame them.
Right.
That's not that, you know what I mean? Like there's a team element of going like, you can't externalize that. You can't say,
Yes.
hey, you know what? Phil missed that shot. And if he hadn't missed that shot, we would have won the game. You're like, how's that possible? Like how many shots get taken through a game? Like all of the different factors that come through and being able to, I think for me, calibrate some of that. Golf was different because it's an individual sport.
Yep.
Man, sometimes I suck. Like you're just like, I just sucked. Like,
Yeah.
why? Well, I don't know. Right. It's okay to be like, I don't know. Sometimes you have to like dig in and go, if it's happening over and over and over and over again, you got to hit the range and fix it. You know what? Sometimes what happened? I just played like junk. I don't know what happened. I played like junk. It's over. And you go to the next one. But I also never walked off the golf course on the 13th hole, knowing that I'm like, this round is just, this round's over. Like, no, you finish. And I think that's a
Yes.
really big piece of like all those different things combined are all parts of sports. If I'm on the 13th hole, this is not going well, I'm trying to fix it for the next round. I'm not trying, you know what I
Yes.
mean? I'm not trying to like, save this round per se. I'm going to try and keep playing. But I think all those things together, playing individual sports, there's no one to blame. Playing team sports, you shouldn't blame, right? Like there's not, because you have contribution to all of those other things that happen along the way. So I think a lot of that stuff was really important for me in sports. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing in business. It's the same thing in life too, right? Like I think there's accountability, there's learning, there's like finishing, there's all those other things really play out a lot of different ways.
Yes, that's good. Lot of life lessons there. So as college pro is, successful for you, you're climbing, you're taking over larger areas, you're being tasked with more duties. In 2016, you guys had started to fish with Tungsten, and talk a little bit about how the whole idea of potentially building a brand came to be.
Yeah, I mean, so fishing with tungsten, it's tungsten weights. So a lot of artificial lures get weighted down so that they can actually, go down into the water column a different way, or get through weeds, right? So to where the fish live. So a lot of that was for years made with lead, and it's still a pretty prevalent thing. But lead is a softer metal than tungsten. A lot of companies are making a premium product made out of tungsten, which is more dense. So when that more dense metal hits a rock, you can feel it better. So you can feel what's going on. And on the flip side, if you want to put a 1 ounce piece of lead beside a 1 ounce piece of tungsten, the tungsten is significantly smaller. So it takes less away from the bait you're using, and it actually, a smaller profile gets it through weeds because you're not trying to push as much through. So that was what was starting to happen, but it's triple the price. Maybe at the time it was probably more like 5 times the price. So that was a big thing. And so I was starting to use it. But we have a type of fish called a pike here, and they have really big teeth, and they live in a lot of the same places as bass, which are fish that we're seeking after. A lot of the tournaments are for that specific species. So when I'd flip out the lure and a pike would eat it, he bites it off, it's gone. So, and those, it was frustrating to be going, well, there's $12 gone, there's $10 gone, there's $12 gone. So we started looking at alternatives, and I started actually looking at sponsorships to work with some other brands. I started thinking like, gosh, you know what, if it's a sponsorship, I wonder if there's actually like those companies are getting that price, that product that they're willing to give me at a potentially cheaper price, or an allotment for free to be able to exchange for brand. They must be getting it cheaper. So let's just figure that part out. Like, is that an option? And that's where it started. And I started talking to Chris, because I was like, I think we found a good manufacturer. I have the email saved in my email where I sent him. I think this could actually happen. I think we could actually do this. So that's where it kind of went. And we went, hey, look, like, let's get some samples. And the worst thing is we had to, our first order had to be 1,000 pieces. And we thought, oh my gosh, like 1,000 pieces. Like, but I was like, you know what? The worst case, I'll have tungsten for the rest of my life.
I got a lot of fish.
I'm going to use it. So if that's the worst case, let's try to build something. And so we're doing some product testing, but we decided to start the brand first, because we thought, you know what, if it wasn't going to be tungsten, and we have a community and a brand, we can probably introduce a different product to that community and try and figure something out. So we were kind of going down that path of like, what's it going to be? But the tungsten one just felt like right timing. More people were starting to use it. It was extremely expensive, but prices were starting to come down because there was some competition. And volumes being able to be used, and we were able to start it as a tungsten brand, but we built a community first.
I love it. So we're going to come back to that, but I want you to finish. So you got 1,000 piece order. Holy cow, that's a lot. And then we do a Black Friday special. Talk about how long that 1,000 lasted.
It was not very long. We were shocked, right? But it was interesting. When I say that we built it, again, this community, and we learned a lot from that. I don't think we weren't smart about it. We were trying to be intuitive. We went, well, I don't know, we can't just like launch a website and hope people show up. So we went down the path of like, let's try and and build an Instagram account. It's 2016, things were different, but we'll
Yeah.
build this Instagram account. We made it a repost account, which was popular at the time, but I think what we did a bit differently was we were actually anglers, and we would scroll and repost things that we liked,
Right.
which meant others would. We built that community, and then from there we introduced the product. So yeah, it did not last long at all, the thousand pieces, if you will. We feel like we made some good decisions to get it started, but we decided we weren't going to introduce the product until we hit 10,000 followers. We're like, if we're at 10,000 followers at the time and we've got this community, I think like that's the point we can introduce a product. That took us about 3 months to do at the
Yeah.
time. And then from there we introduced the product, but 1,000 pieces didn't last long once we let the 10,000 people in on where we were going with it. And it was a really cool start. We haven't had a day that our site's been active that we haven't had a purchase, especially even in the beginning when we had that.
That's
which was very,
awesome.
very cool.
That is great. So as you're developing the product itself, obviously, you and Chris are, I mean, very into the industry, but did you seek outside opinions and things like that? Or was it more so, hey, we've got enough, industry experience, we're just going to go with what we think?
At the beginning, it was purely just what we think. And I think the product that we use, it's a flipping weight and a drop shot. They're pretty standard.
Mhm.
So I'd equate it to like, basketball. You're saying like basketball, like the ball,
Yeah,
right? Like
right.
it's going to be pretty standard. I play, for you, like I played a lot, like, you can get a few things. You go like, this thing's either junk or this thing is like good. And,
Yep.
like that was enough for us in the beginning. But as we've gone through it, now we have, we're in the range of almost 500 SKUs. We've got some high level professional anglers that we do work with on certain things, and I'll pick their brain on different stuff. And, is there something that you currently have in lead that you'd love to see in tungsten? And, we're thinking of doing this thing over here, like, and we get some input from different people on design for sure. But I do think it's a benefit to be part of the industry because, as I said, I fished Sunday, right? Like
Yeah, right.
I'm in there, like I've got our gear tied on, and I think there's a lot of that where I'm like, if I won't tie it on, you won't see it on our site. And I think that's a big piece of it. So it's a little more of both now, but it's still probably 80% from just stuff that we use and work on.
Yes. Now, talk a little bit about scaling the business, right? So, when you first start, you don't know what to expect, right? Hey, we got 1,000 pieces. We thought this could last me for forever. Worst case scenario. Well, it turns out it doesn't even last like a week.
Yeah.
But talk about scaling and increase in volumes and what all goes into that from your standpoint, but also the business standpoint.
It's been a really interesting learn. You mentioned College Pro. For me, that's a service business, and that
Mhm.
was my background. That's what I've been doing for a long time at that point. But this is an inventory business, which is very different,
Yeah.
like very, very different. And it was a growing inventory business, which is also different. So we don't have like outside investors or like anything like that. But what we learned was that, if we're our lead time is roughly 6 to 8 weeks on product. So if we're predicting, like that was something that I was used to and that I'd learned a lot from running the College Pro business is building a plan and then analyzing like where are we at and how quick is that growing and where do we think sales might be in 6 or 8 weeks. So if it was going to be more sales in 6 or 8 weeks than it is today, we'd need to bring in more inventory than we have today.
Yep.
So what we did is, and we were very careful to only grow as fast as our cash flow would allow.
Yeah.
So that was a really, really, really big learning point for me is like, we're doing all these sales. Why do we have no money?
Right.
It's like, what is going on? But it's all that our inventory is growing
Yep.
because it's got to be able to withstand the next, what we're anticipating period of time. So that was a really interesting thing. Like, people think as they're starting a product business that you're doing a ton of sales, which means you're like rolling in cash. That is not likely the case, because all your money gets tied up in future inventory because you think you're going to keep growing. So that was really something, again, for anybody listening that's thinking about starting it or how did that work or what that is, or is experiencing that where you're like, I'm doing all these sales, but why don't I have any cash? Like that could be definitely if your inventory asset value is higher today than it was a year ago, that's where all your money is.
Yes.
So that was an important thing to learn, and how to scale was to scale in ordinance with some of that, and then bringing in new products adds another layer because now you've got another set of SKUs to inventory and maintain and grow inventory on. So that's something that, in terms of scaling the business, that was really, really interesting and challenging, and still is, because when we brought in retail, which is another bit, so direct to consumer is how we started. It's still how we do the majority of our business, but retail is a whole nother beast because you've then got terms. So if you're working with a retailer with 60-day terms, now I'm predicting more, but I'm also paying for the inventory and not being paid for it 60 days out. So it just exaggerates that whole piece. So I think for us, one of the things that we've always been able to do in scaling is stay pretty lean. It's Chris and I, and then we have the gig economy. That's a huge piece. We got freelancers that we've fractionally been able to assemble without being able to bring on. So we've got a team of, call it 8 to 10. But they're all fractional. And I think what we've always done is gone, hey, like once we hit a bottleneck, we need to put a person in place. So initial start, me on my computer in Ontario, Canada, or on my couch on my computer, and Chris like in Florida at the time. And that's where all our inventory was, in Florida. And we'd get orders, and Chris would work his day job and come home and pack orders and ship. And once we got to the point where he's like, I'm up until 2:30 in the morning right now packing orders, like, and we're getting more orders than we can realistically fulfill, we brought in a fulfillment partner. We went that way. When we were trying to get graphics for our products, and we're trying to get all these graphics, and we're like, we can't keep up to the number of graphics and things that we're trying to build and whatever, we brought in somebody that we have as somebody that does a lot of our graphics for us. Accounting and financials, that's another big one. It's different when you're doing 10 orders a month, or you're doing 1,000 orders a month. Now we want someone that's going to keep those. There's a lot more liability on that. So, hey, like, I don't have hours and hours and hours to make sure that stuff's all clean. So like, let's make sure we bring somebody in for that. But they're not all full-time people. It's really trying to go like, where is it starting to like get some friction and probably not optimized. And we don't either have the time or expertise. Where can we go bring in a fractional person to do some of those things? But we've always done them ourselves. So I think of like Facebook ads and that, like, we ran those ourselves. At some point we're like, cool, we know how this works, let's bring somebody in that's better at it to try to get, but now we have enough context on like what is good and what is not to be able to assess their performance versus just creating an expense line and going, hey, you do it and tell me how it's going. So I think a lot of that stuff in terms of scaling was big learning, and we're learning it right now too. We're still learning it. We're still scaling. We're still like, okay, well, now who do we need next? And how do we now manage a whole group of freelancers versus employees? So I still think like we learn all the time. But that's kind of some of the pieces that we've seen as that business has grown, that we've just learned and been forced to learn along the way.
Now you talked about getting into retail space, and anyone that gets a product into retail space knows that is not an easy thing. And depending on the size of the retail space you're getting into, it can differ, right? I mean, if you're in, here in the States, Bass Pro Shop, Cabela's, those places are like, the crown jewel. It's the really big spots, but you also have, little mom and pop shops, that right by the water. That's like, oh crap, I forgot something. I better go get, a few things. So talk about the growth of the retail space for you guys and getting in your product, because once again, it's competitive.
It is. And I think it's really, again, the crown jewel is like that whole thing, like, can be the worst thing that can happen to some businesses. And, for us, we're in, a good example would be like a Sportsman's Warehouse and all that other stuff. If we had gotten into that early, it might have crushed us. We wouldn't have had the inventory, nor the experience, nor the relationships with some of our vendors and manufacturers to be able to actually go and service that client. So, and we wouldn't have had the systems to be able to manage that client too. So I think that's a really big one. I think retail is a hard one, because I say to Chris, I complain like crazy about retail to Chris. It's growing our business, but I'm like, man, there's so much more to it. I think for us, like, we got some of our professional anglers really helped us with that. Not that they were making the calls, but it was basically like let's say like the blue check mark. No, this is good stuff. I think understanding that a retailer basically needs 40% margin, or you're not going to even get a look.
Yep.
but is important to know if you're going to go look at retail in general. And the mom and pop shops, like being in some of those, really, that was actually a really good thing to be able to prove to a bigger retailer and
Mhm.
learn how to work with retailers at the same time before you go in. And I think another piece is understanding like what's the buyer in a big retailer what are they trying to solve? And honestly,
Yes.
in COVID, we got into a lot of them because the problem we could solve for them is inventory.
Right.
We could get like, they didn't actually care at that point. If I was trying to go talk to them about price and what they're trying to solve or quality, like, doesn't matter. I'm like, I can get you inventory in 6 weeks consistently. They're like, I'm in.
Deal.
So like that was a big piece of it. So I think, retail is a cash flow challenge. It
Yep.
sucks cash flow. It is a lower margin by far. You're going to start playing games with retailers. So like defective product allowances. We're like, what are you talking about? They're tungsten weights. They're not defect. There's zero chance of this being defective.
Yep.
Or marketing co-ops that also start chipping into some of your profits and some of those other things. So I think it's really cool to walk into a Bass Pro, or I get, pictures from people that I know in Texas that, or a year and a half ago, like they were in a Shields, like a big box store, and they're like, you're in here? Like, how is this possible? And I'm like,
Yeah.
that stuff's all really cool to get, but there is an opportunity cost of like, how do you use your working capital? I know we're
Yep.
geeking out on some of like the business, but I'm like, I still don't know that we're doing the right thing. I want to be in there. We think the retail actually fuels our D2C, like our direct to consumer.
Yep.
That's why we do it. That's the only reason we do retail is
Yes.
not profitability. It's like someone that walks into these retailers, again, no offense to any retailers. I love retail. Like we
Yeah.
love
Right.
that we're doing that, right? Like we're not going to
Yep.
stop that. But a really, really big part of why we do that is that we feel like it's brand exposure to somebody who doesn't know us. We're not
Yes.
we're not Nike, right? We're
Yep.
still Woo Tungsten, or sorry, Woo Tungsten, right? So
Yeah.
so we're not there yet. So
Yep.
it gets somebody to, we're on a shelf, someone knows about us, someone can hit our website, and then we can maybe convert them to a direct to consumer customer down the road. So we think it's intertwined, but retail, it's what's, especially in a competitive space, what problem are you solving for them that someone else might not
Yep.
understand? The cash flow timeline is kind of mucky, and that you're going to probably be over your head for a little bit as you navigate learning. And one of the other things I'd say, we have a partner from another brand that we lean on, actually, that we share one of these professional anglers with.
Yeah.
And we got to know pretty well, and just somebody who's like, they're not a competitor of
Yep.
ours. We're kind of friends in the industry,
Yeah.
who's been in that before, and really being able to pick his brain where I'm like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
Right. Like and not having like the needing to have like the ego to be like, I should know what this means, but like, what does this mean? What are they, why would they? Oh, okay. I know what that means now. Okay. So here's what I'm going to have to go do with that. And I think that was a really big thing, is making some friends in the industry that can actually help you, and you can help them back.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, I had a gal on the show, Helen, and she talked about how she got her product into, some of these retailers, and she was actually losing money on the sales early on because they'd run a discount to like try and sell volume. And she's like, yeah, when you do that with the retailer, I eat the discount. Like that 10% discount just comes straight from me. It's not like we're sharing in that.
Yep.
And she goes, but it gave me validity, right? I could say I'm in Walmart,
Yep.
and because I'm now in Walmart, X, Y, and Z companies going to be willing to have it, or, this, master anglers, willing to talk to me about it. So I think, yeah, sometimes it may be a little bit of a lost leader, but it helps open doors in other areas.
Yeah. And I think that's there's so many decisions that come into things like that, because there's, sometimes you just want to get the product in Walmart, like,
Yep.
just let me get it. But there's really a lot of that, like, what is the loss? Big box stores, like, they've got all the leverage, like you're going to get squashed and squished everywhere, and that's okay. But just knowing that that's what's coming, just because Walmart makes a product order for $250,000, then it actually means like I hope you break even on that. Like,
Right.
I really hope you do. And depending on if you've got a 50% margin, let's say, for your own sake, I hope you have $125,000 in cash to float that product order, and that it doesn't break everything else in your other business. But you're floating that 125 grand in cash to make no profit. So that's what I mean. Like, where do you, that 125, like in working capital, could that get used somewhere else or not?
Yep.
I do think there's a bit of the ego sometimes with new brands and new products to want to have that like ego pat on the back that like we got into Walmart.
Yep.
We didn't even touch that until we had the cash flow to be able to actually and understand that we can fulfill an order of that size, and how would that whole thing actually work. As I said, if we got into some of these big box retailers in our first year, we would be, I don't know, the company would still exist. We just would have got crushed.
Yeah, no, you're so right. Now, one thing I'd like to hear a little bit about is starting a business, right? So many times the barrier for people is, well, I don't have the perfect plan yet. I don't know all the marketing material. I don't know my exact, plan of how it's going to be successful. Talk about just getting started, right? Like, hey, you got to have some idea of where you want this to go. But I would imagine that when you guys first created this business, you may or may not have had the vision you have for the business today. But talk about just being willing to start, and, then everything else we can figure out as we go.
Yeah. And I think we talked about it before, like the reality is it's probably not going to work, which is okay. Right. Like, I think like that, like like Tungsten is not the only business that I've tried to start. Yep. Right. Like, I think like that's an element of it too. You're going to learn and iterate. And like, I can only imagine what it would have been like to have the perfect business plan right around like mid-February 2020. Like stuff like that happens too. Right? Like, so I don't know what to tell, or, call it in 2009 in that financial crisis, or all the other things that are going to happen in the world. Right. Like, I think that, build that perfect business plan. You're going to crush this retail store, great. And then like, hit COVID, and now you're done for 18 months. Now what are you going to do? Right. Like, you're going to open the perfect restaurant business plan, and it's going to open on March 1st, 2020. Yeah. That worked out really well. You know what I mean? So it's better to sometimes just go with it and learn. And that's not to go like haphazardly. Yep. I think like that's an important piece of it, and to have an idea of where you want to go. And, so I think Tungsten, like we knew flipping weights and drop shot weights were their core. Like that's just core. They were already being made. Like that's going to happen no matter where we go. And those are all, we just felt like that wasn't a fad. That's not going to go away. They're not going to go moldy. Let's bring some stuff in. But like, I don't know what our volumes are going to be. We're going to guess, and we're going to sell out of some, and some we're going to hold on to for 6 months. But we just knew that was like, it was safe, but it wasn't necessarily cautious like that, either. So it's, we started, and if it didn't work, like I said, the worst case for us in that situation, I had Tungsten for the rest of my life. Carry on. So I think like when I think about starting, or even like once a business is started in decision making freezes a lot of people too. If it's not a business killer, it's sometimes I would rather make 15 decisions and be wrong on 10 of them than make 2 decisions and be 100% of the time. It means I've made 5 right decisions versus 2 right decisions. Yeah. But if any of those 15 are like business killers or could put us out of business, I can't make them that quickly. Yep. So I think like that's kind of when I think about the idea. Like, if I love fishing. We just talked about, I've fished all my life. Like, if this fishing business didn't work, I would have done another one. I would have done something else. I would have kept trying and iterating. But it kept working, and it kept working, and it kept going down some of those paths. So I think, anybody who's trying to start something, the best thing to do is, if you know a fair bit about it, and if you can live with the worst case scenario, start. Yep. If you can't live with the worst case scenario, you might need to think about something else a little bit more or different, or not do it at all. And I think like sometimes, again, ego gets into it. No one wants to tell all our friends they started a business and then it not work. But as I said, I use that example. I get asked that every once in a while, like, about starting and how do you build a perfect plan to make sure it's going to work. I'm like, you don't, because you could have had an amazing restaurant set out for March 1st, 2020 and got like devastated like a lot of other people did. So I don't know. I think that's my thought on it is, if you can live with your worst case scenario, you better get going on it. Because if you don't, someone else is. There's probably 30 other people right now that are thinking, or more, the exact same idea you do. Yep. So get on it before they do, and you might have something that's really successful and something that you can build on for a really long time.
You bet. Now you segued perfectly, and that is, hey, this COVID thing happened, and all of a sudden there was a very few amount of activities that one was, I guess, socially acceptable to do, and fishing happened to be one of them. And because it was one of them, you guys actually got recognized as one of the fastest growing companies in the Inc. 5000. So once again, I always think accolades like that they sound really cool, but it really is just a testament to all the hard work that you've done, right? So talk about how that the last year has worked out for you guys.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. Like, again, I know COVID hurt a lot of businesses for really bad, and honestly for a really long time, I think. And we were fortunate. But we were able, I think one of the biggest things, again, the moment we were it's a Bassmaster Classic. It's like the World Championships of bass fishing. We were exhibiting there for the first time on, it was March 8th to 10th, 2020. And we get a lot of our product overseas. And they were having troubles early.
Yeah.
And literally I said, they were like, we're having a hard time. I was like, I don't care what it is. Just put it in boxes, send it to me, invoice me later, whatever you can get to me. I can't show up to an expo and have no product, right? Like,
yeah,
just send it to me. If we buy it on our site, send it to me. Because again, what's the worst case scenario? I get a bunch of stuff that's not there. I can get it into our warehouse.
Yeah.
Fine. So back into our warehouse, like no problem. So that's where it all kind of started, because the next week everything started to get, like a week later, everything was
right.
down. So the decision we made then was a lot of people were tightening up, and we overbought inventory, because that experience is, I went, what if we can't get inventory? Like we didn't think COVID was going to last 2 years.
Yeah, right.
I was like, what if this thing lasts like a month and we can't get more inventory, right? For like May, June, July, which is our busiest season. So we overbought. We just overbought, emptied every cash that we could possibly put into, every dollar. We could zero everything. Let's get inventory. And we did. And a lot of other companies froze. And so a lot of other companies, when I said retail, like a lot of other companies didn't have inventory. And we were one of the only ones that did, which helped us really acquire a lot more customers in a time that was there. And that wasn't, I don't know, that wasn't like visionary, crazy thinking. That was like, oh my gosh, this was a really hard thing. We also know our products don't expire. The worst case for us is we have this inventory. We have an extra 6 months of inventory. No big deal. Let's go that way. I think that's a better worst case scenario. And we did it. So yeah, it was a really challenging year for a lot of people. And yeah, I mean, we're navigating just like everyone else was, and everything else. And how's this going to be? And are people going to start selling all their boats? Because I remember 2009 when like the stock market, I was in a airport on a layover watching the stock market just like literally drop last March, that day that everything just kind of went crazy.
Yeah.
But the last year was a really cool year for us. And it was one that we're proud of, that we just kept moving. Like we just kept going. We just kept doing the work. We just kept doing the work. And yeah, it was cool. We were number 234, I think it was, or 236 on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies. I mean, that's really, really cool. But I think what we were is we had this fortune of like all the foundation that we built that we could lean into. And then again, we've got a product in an industry, and we just made that right decision, let's say, to go, we're going to over index on inventory, which was I don't know, it wasn't actually that hard of a decision to make. It wasn't an easy one, but like, it wasn't that hard of a decision to go make, but like making the one decision that way versus the other. If we didn't have any inventory in May and inventory delays were happening the way we would have had a really rough year. It would have been really, really rough for us. We would have missed a really big opportunity, but we were lucky enough to take advantage of it because of that. And our business grew, and it's probably flat-ish this year, but that's good, because we're bringing in a bunch of new products. We're shifting a bunch of like our business, and it's giving us a bit of space to maintain, but then to add a freelancer here or swap one out or work through a bunch of different things. So it's been kind of cool.
Yes. Well, Aaron, I appreciate your time and just sharing, the journey of you, but also the business. It's so fun to see, the entrepreneurial side of you as an 8-year-old, the fishing side of you, now today, and seeing all those things come full circle for you. And the thing I want to highlight most is there's no doubt that part of the business's success and continued success is just due to your passion for the industry, right? It's not like you happen to walk into a Dairy Queen and you're like, I kind of like ice cream. It's like, no, this is something that Aaron is very passionate about. And so that is very evident as you speak, but it's also evident in, the success of the business as well.
Yeah. I'm looking at my desk right now. Like I got like fishing lures. I got my dad, you know what I mean? I had junk everywhere. Like that's just where it is. Like I've got this are the samples for our new product. Great. You know what I mean? Like I've got all this stuff all over the place. Like these are some of the stuff. Yeah, again, like it's there. And when you're passionate about something, you can put the time in. It's why you'll do something at 11 p.m. after your kids go to bed. It's
Right.
why you'll try and get an hour or something in after. It's why I'm tinkering around with different things. Like that's the only reason, right? Like that's the only way it works for me, at least long term, I think. But knowing a lot more about it allows you to make better decisions and really talk about it a lot. So I mean, thanks for having me on. And again, Phil, it was awesome to get to know you a little bit and chat. And yeah, it's brought me back to some of those like moments in time, if you will, like, that moment, did you know it when? I'm like, it's really cool.
I love it. Well, thanks again, Aaron.